Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm so glad you're joining us today because we are looking at a situation that is actively reshaping the world right outside our windows.
Yeah, it really is a paradigm-shifting moment.
Today is March 9, 2026, and if you have looked at the news or honestly just looked at the price of gas during your morning commute today, you know that a massive geopolitical shockwave is currently unfolding.
Absolutely. We're looking at a scenario where the fundamental rules of global trade and military deterrence and honestly just economic stability are being rewritten in real time.
Right, and to understand how we got here, our deep dive today is based on a stack of incredibly dense geopolitical briefings and intelligence analyses that break down the ongoing 2026 Iran-US-Israel war.
It's a lot of material to get through.
It is. Specifically, we're looking at a stunning strategic pivot being called reverse maximum pressure. But before we get into the timeline and the tactics, I need to explicitly pause here and address the nature of what we're discussing.
That's a good idea because it is a highly charged situation with intense global ramifications.
Exactly. The source text we're analyzing deals with active military conflict, intense political maneuvering, and heavily contested narratives. So I want to state very clearly to you, our listener, that we are not taking sides here today.
Right.
We are not aligning with any left-wing, right-wing, or international political factions. We are absolutely not endorsing any of the military actions, the political viewpoints, or the propaganda claims that we are going to discuss. Our mission today is simply to act as your impartial guides.
Just sticking to the text.
Yes, exactly. We are here to help you understand the facts, the strategies, and the ideas contained strictly within the source material we've been provided.
And that mission is crucial because the strategy outlined in these documents is, well, it's incredibly complex. We are looking at how a technologically inferior military is currently paralyzing global trade.
Yeah.
And they are doing it not through sheer kinetic force, but through a masterclass in geography, psychology, and economics.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's go back to the inciting incident. Just over a week ago, at dawn on February 28th, 2026, the world woke up to Operation Iron Resolve.
Yeah. The initial strike.
Yes, a massive coordinated strike by the U.S. and Israel. We're talking about B-2 stealth bombers and Israeli F-35s lighting up the sky, hammering Iranian infrastructure. Can you break down the actual military impact of that initial wave?
Yeah, the sheer scale of that initial operation was staggering, and the numbers paint a very stark reality. During those initial strikes, the coalition managed to destroy 70% of Iran's centrifuges at the Natanz and Fordo facilities.
70%?
Right. They hit Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, missile silos, and they basically decimated regional air defenses.
Wow.
And the most incredible statistic from a purely military standpoint, 0 coalition losses. Not a single aircraft was shot down.
That is wild and on the ground.
On the Iranian side, the Red Crescent confirmed 555 dead by March 2, with the vast majority of those being military personnel.
So following that strike, former President Trump declared that the nuclear threat had been neutralized and that regime change was, at this point, optional. And this is where everyone sort of held their breath, right?
Exactly, because the U.S. explicitly avoided a ground invasion.
Yeah, nobody wanted an Iraq-style urban meat grinder, so the expectation in the West was either a traditional bloody retaliation or a complete capitulation. But wait, if the coalition completely wiped out their nuclear infrastructure without losing a single jet, how on earth is Iran the one dictating the pace of this war a week later?
What's fascinating here is this strategy of reverse maximum pressure. They didn't retaliate with a doomed ground war, and they certainly didn't capitulate. They completely inverted the playbook.
How so?
Well, to understand it, we have to look back at the 2025 sanctions. Under the revived Trump administration policies, the U.S. applied maximum pressure, axing waivers for China and hunting down shadow fleets. They managed to choke Iran's oil exports from a 2018 peak of 2.5 million barrels per day down to a mere trickle of under 300,000 barrels a day.
They essentially cut off the financial oxygen. But Tehran didn't crumble under those sanctions, did they?
No, they didn't. They built what they call a resistance economy. They funded it with $5 billion a year in Iraqi smuggling, Russian barter agreements trading arms for crude, and solidarity oil swaps with Venezuela.
That's a lot of backdoor funding.
Right, and they spent 18 months hoarding fuel stockpiles. So when Operation Iron Resolve hit, Iran didn't lash out blindly. They took the concept of maximum pressure and turned the tables. Instead of the U.S. choking Iranian oil, Iran decided to choke the world's oil.
And they did it using geography. I mean, we all know how vital the Strait of Hormuz is, but to put the math into perspective for you, before this conflict, 20% of the entire global oil supply squeezed through that 21-mile gap every single day.
Every single day.
That is 21 million barrels of oil flowing through that throat daily. And suddenly, Iran says, the strait belongs to us.
It's the ultimate choke point. The IRGC had actually been running drills in 2024 and 2025, seeding the approaches to Hormuz with covert sea mines. They positioned Shahed 149 drones and highly accurate Fetha 110 hypersonic missiles along the coastline.
So they basically walled it off.
Exactly. They effectively turned a commercial waterway into a non-kinetic fortress.
Think about the scale of the paralysis that caused. The briefing describes 706 massive oil tankers queued up outside the strait almost overnight. They looked like supplicants at a sultan's gate.
That's quite an image.
It really is. On March 1, tanker traffic plunged 86%. They went from an average of 25 ships a day down to just 3.
And this highlights the subtle genius of the strategy. Iran isn't trying to fight a traditional naval war. They aren't going ship to ship against the U.S. Navy because they know they would lose that fight in an afternoon.
Right, that would be a very short battle.
Very short. Instead, they are engaging in psychological and economic warfare. They used incredibly cheap drones to light up just 4 tankers. That's all it took. The mere fear of those drones, combined with the threat of hidden sea mines, caused maritime insurance premiums to spike by 500% globally.
So it's forced voluntary shutdowns. Ship captains are simply balking at the drone shadows. They won't sail.
Who would you?
Definitely not. But what happens to those 706 stalled vessels? If they can't go through the strait, the only alternative is rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa. What does that detour actually look like logistically?
It's a total nightmare for global supply chains. Rerouting around the Cape adds 15 days to the journey. And from a financial perspective, it costs an extra $1 million per trip.
$1 million extra per trip.
Yeah. It's a staggering amount of economic bleeding, and it's buying Iran weeks of immense leverage without having to fire a single major naval shot against a U.S. warship.
And the coalition's response to this blockade reveals a really terrifying financial reality.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the math of this asymmetry. It is perhaps the most critical takeaway from a military logistics standpoint. Iran is enforcing this blockade using Shahed drones that cost roughly $2,000 a pop.
$2,000?
Yes. But to protect what little shipping is still moving, the coalition is forced to shoot those drones down using Patriot missiles that cost $2 million each.
A $2 million missile to shoot down a $2,000 drone. You don't have to be a defense contractor to know that math is totally unsustainable.
Exactly. And it goes further than that. They are rapidly dwindling the U.S. stockpile of JASMs. Those are the highly advanced, incredibly expensive air-to-surface cruise missiles.
Right.
The coalition is literally burning through its most sophisticated munitions just to keep a fraction of global trade moving, while Iran uses cheap, mass-produced technology to sustain the blockade.
So they've completely paralyzed the water. But they didn't stop at the shoreline, did they? Let's talk about the land escalation on March 2. Did they go after population centers with their retaliation?
No, and the precision here is wild. On March 2, we saw a massive crescendo of retaliation. They launched over 1,000 munitions, specifically Sagil medium-range ballistic missiles, along with 189 other ballistic variants and 941 drones. But they completely ignored population centers. They targeted the region's economic arteries.
Walk me through those targets.
They hit the UAE's Ruwais refinery, which processes 1.8 million barrels a day. They hit Saudi Arabia's Abqaiq and Ras Tanura facilities, which echoes those devastating attacks we saw back in 2019.
Oh, yeah.
They faltered Qatar's North Field operations, which is critical for global liquefied natural gas, or LNG, production, and they crippled Kuwait's Amati separator and airport.
The immediate hit to the Gulf from those strikes was 3 to 5 million barrels of oil per day taken offline. But the casualties were shockingly low. We're talking about 10 killed in the UAE, 8 in Kuwait, 3 in Bahrain, and minimal casualties in Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Total Gulf deaths were around 30. Why be so surgical? If you were launching 1,000 munitions, why actively avoid mass casualties?
Because the strategic goal isn't to kill civilians. It's to psychologically eviscerate the deterrence provided by the United States.
How does that work?
Well, By striking vital economic infrastructure so close to major U.S. military hubs like the Al Udeid base in Qatar and the Dhafar base in the UAE without causing mass civilian casualties, Iran is driving a wedge. They want these host nations, who are now watching their refineries burn, to quietly whisper to Washington, "Enough, we can't afford this protection anymore."
It's all about pushing the pain threshold of America's allies. And that pain is being multiplied across the entire region by what are being called phantom multipliers. It isn't just Iran launching these strikes. They've activated their entire network of proxy forces. How is this stretching the coalition thin?
The shadow war is in full effect, and it forces a conventional military to fight on 3 or 4 fronts simultaneously. First, you have Hezbollah in Lebanon. They fired over 500 rockets across the border, which has completely pinned down the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, in the north.
So Israel is distracted.
Exactly. Israel cannot commit its full force to the broader conflict because they are bogged down defending their own northern border.
And what about the waterways outside of Hormuz?
That's the second front. You have the Houthis reviving their chaos in the Red Sea. They are using sea mines in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, creating a secondary naval choke point that requires even more coalition ships and missiles to manage.
Wow.
And finally, you have the Iraqi PMF, the Popular Mobilization Forces, which is a massive umbrella network of state-sponsored militias in Iraq. They are aggressively peppering coalition bases across Iraq and Syria, which has already resulted in 21 coalition deaths.
This brings us to a really difficult part of the analysis. The fog of war and the psychological operations, or psyops, surrounding the human cost of all this. Because depending on who you ask, the death toll from this shadow war is entirely different.
Very different.
The total Middle East casualty ledger as of March 10 ranges wildly from 2,232 to 5,048. How do we account for a gap of nearly 3,000 deaths?
The discrepancy comes down to propaganda chess. The Iranian tallies claim over 1,200 civilian deaths, and they're actively amplifying these numbers to generate international sympathy and paint the coalition as reckless.
Right, controlling the narrative.
Yes. Meanwhile, the coalition counts focus strictly on verified military deaths to minimize the perceived human cost and steel the spines of their domestic populations and allies. For context, verified numbers show 18 Israeli deaths, 486 in Lebanon from the Hezbollah barrages, and 7 to 9 U.S. service members killed.
And Iran is playing that propaganda chess brilliantly on the global stage. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei gave an address on March 2, framing this entirely as defensive jihad, no aggression. And that message is pulsing across international networks. But even more wildly, deep fakes of this narrative have racked up 500 million views on TikTok.
500 million.
500 million views on an algorithm that heavily skews toward younger demographics.
The optics are a weapon themselves. By avoiding territorial grabs and actually allowing Gaza aid convoys to proceed mid-war, Iran is engaging in a kind of poetic judo. They're intentionally positioning themselves as a regional David, recoiling from the heavy club of a Western Goliath.
And it's working.
The polling shows it's working brilliantly. There was a 62% sympathy tilt among Arab youth viewing Iran favorably in this conflict. It is actively corroding Western moral armor in the region.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because all of this geopolitical maneuvering, all these drone strikes and proxy wars and tanker reroutes, they aren't just happening in a vacuum thousands of miles away. They are hitting you, the listener, right in the wallet today. The economic maelstrom is here.
Oh, absolutely. The immediate fallout in the energy markets has been violent. Brent crude has been wildly volatile, swinging between $94.12 and $103.74 a barrel. That is a 40% year-to-date increase from pre-war levels.
And that translates directly to the pump. The national average for U.S. gas has hit $3.47 a gallon. In places like California, it's spiking up to $4.20.
Yeah, you feel that immediately.
Exactly. Aviation jet fuel is up 35%, which means travel costs are skyrocketing. And it's not just energy, it's the food on your table. Fertilizer costs have jumped 25%, and wheat is up 12%. Massive food inflation is brewing globally as supply chains buckle.
It's a bleak picture of cascading effects. We are seeing imagery of idle factories sitting like beached whales and electric vehicles suddenly mocking internal combustion engine commuters as gas prices hike by 75 cents a gallon. This is the soft underbelly of America that Iran is actively targeting.
The domestic pressure in the U.S. is boiling over. Former President Trump's political base is fuming at the pumps, and there are already murmurs of trucker convoys echoing the massive protests we saw back in 2022.
The timing is critical here.
Yeah, the U.S. strategic petroleum reserves were severely depleted following drawdowns during the previous administration, and the infrastructure needed for a drill, baby, drill rapid domestic response is lagging heavily.
And this leads to a shocking polling statistic right now. 55% of the American public blames the war for their shrinking wallets. This is the crux of Iran's ultimate wager.
What's the wager?
They are betting that American suburban outrage over high gas prices and exploding grocery bills will topple the political hawks in Washington far faster than American F-35s can topple the regime in Tehran.
It's a siege on the homeland, but fought entirely through the supply chain. And while the U.S. struggles with this domestic friction, the global chessboard is shifting rapidly. India is absolutely choking right now because they rely on that strait for 40% of their imports. How are other major powers reacting to this chaos?
They are exploiting it. China and Russia are taking massive advantage of the situation by buying up heavily discounted crudes from Iran's shadow fleets.
Of course.
Despite the blockade, those shadow fleets are still sneaking about 1 million barrels a day out to fund the IRGC. Furthermore, it tests the very fabric of global alliances. Countries in the BRICS coalition, the economic bloc including Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are stepping in to mediate.
That's a huge shift.
It is. South Africa is leading diplomatic efforts, while the traditional Western powers find themselves economically and strategically cornered.
So what does this all mean? How does this actually end? The intelligence briefings lay out 3 distinct vortex scenarios for the endgame here. Let's look at the base case first.
The base case is given a 60% probability. In this scenario, the economic pain forces diplomatic talks to open up by May. The Strait of Hormuz eventually reopens, but the damage is done. Oil settles at a painful new normal of around $110 a barrel.
And if it drags on?
That's the prolonged case, sitting at a 30% probability. The blockade continues through the summer, oil spikes to $140 a barrel, and it triggers a severe global recession, shaving a full 1.2% off of global economic growth.
And finally, the worst-case scenario.
The worst-case scenario has a 10% probability. It's a complete quagmire. The U.S. doesn't secure any kind of regime change, the war drags on indefinitely, and the oil throne, the immense leverage provided by controlling that black gold, endures completely unbroken.
Wow.
This raises an important question. Looking at this reverse maximum pressure strategy, we are witnessing a moment where the immutable facts of geography and the world's thirst for oil have managed to temporarily neutralize the most advanced, well-funded military machinery in human history.
Yeah, that's the core of it.
We have multi-billion-dollar aircraft carriers and stealth bombers struggling to defeat the economic gravity of a 21-mile choke point.
It's a vortex of sand and fire. The world is pump-parched and clamoring for a ceasefire, and Iran has cornered not just its foes, but an entire era of conventional military thinking. Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over today as you look at those gas prices.
Yeah, it's something everyone should be thinking about.
If a nation can successfully weaponize global supply chains and maritime insurance markets to physically and economically cripple a superpower without actually winning a single traditional military battle, does this mean the era of traditional military supremacy is officially over? And if so, who else in the world is watching this exact playbook unfold right now, preparing to use it next?
It's a chilling thought.
It really is.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep questioning the headlines, and above all, stay curious.